in the near-term future, I'm actually very interested in social applications of robots. And I think it's important we have robotic systems, especially in the home, but also in schools and hospitals and care facilities that truly care about the people they're interacting with and not just faking it or mimicking it. I just think there's something like deeply unnatural or uncanny valley about this system's pretending that it's being so emotional and caring about you while it's not feeling a single thing. So I think that to me is just sort of distasteful, but I think the far future application is more interesting. So if we have machines, think of two sets of machines in the future. One set is general purpose humanoids, and they're completely unconscious. They're just running deep nets. They're analytical, mathematical, predictable. And then there's another set that are conscious, and they have human values, feelings, awareness, experience. I would rather have the second set go off and explore the cosmos and, continue on our legacy in the stars, rather than these essentially like machine probes that are not. So it's a little bit of a kind of utopian future argument here, but I would love to see our civilization carry on and go beyond this planet as a conscious machine civilization, not as just these kind of like unconscious drones.
Might it be possible to make a humanoid robot that is conscious and by some definitions alive? Is it too far-fetched to even consider that at some point robots might be able to have an inner experience, would know itself, and have its own free will? Our guest today is Dr. Suzanne Gildert, CEO of Nirvanic, a deep tech startup on a mission to understand consciousness and how it applies to robots. Nirvanic is looking to create AI that is conscious using quantum computing. Suzanne believes only by doing this can we bridge the gap between human intuition and machine intelligence. Today we'll ask her, is current AI conscious? Why is it important? What experiments is she working on, and what is the implication of this for safety and ethical concerns? Very smart doesn't even begin to describe her. Get a load of her background. First, she does quantum computing at D-Wave. Then she does robotics, co-founding Kindred AI and later Sanctuary AI, aiming to create human-like intelligence in general-purpose robots. Now she's pulling it all together with her new startup, Nirvanic. She holds 67 US patents and has a PhD in quantum experimental physics. Joining us also is Dr. John Gibbs, a professor of AI, also known as Dr. Know-It-All on YouTube. Welcome, Suzanne. Thank you very much for joining me again.
Thanks, Herbert. Thanks for having me on the show.
So I've had you previously, you spoke about a humanoid robotics company called Sanctuary. Now you're starting your own company, and this is beyond anything I couldn't even imagine somebody's trying to do. What's really cool, I think, Suzanne, about you, and you know this, is that you have a unique background because you co-founded a quantum computing in the past. And then, of course, several robotics companies, right? The Sanctuary being the latest humanoid bot company. So let me just start off by asking you, why are you studying how to create conscious robots?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I worked at D-Wave as an experimental physicist there, and then I founded two robotics AI companies after that. And I've always really been interested in how do you build a mind in a machine. So I've always had this goal throughout the whole career to try and understand how the mind works. And I initially got into quantum physics and quantum computing because I was trying to understand matter and like reality and physics at a deep level. But that got me really interested in how the mind and the brain works. And I was trying to apply quantum computing to AI. And so I ended up moving out of the field of quantum computing for a while and just focused on the AI and robotics because I thought you could discover the mind just through AI research. But what I've found recently, having worked in humanoid robots for so long, is that I think there might be a piece missing. So I tried to build these AI control systems, AI cognitive architectures for humanoid robots for about 10 years now. And during that whole time, although we've made significant leaps forward in making humanoids autonomous, I don't think they're going to get all the way to general purpose autonomy without us fully understanding the mind. So I've now sort of gone back to quantum and I'm trying to understand, is there a quantum component to our thinking and to consciousness more generally? And can we explore that experimentally?
Okay. Yeah. So is there a quantum component to our thinking in general? So I just told you earlier that I also believe that you can explain to us if there's research or data to prove that that's the case. But how would consciousness AI help a bot be more autonomous?
Yeah, so I think for most robotics, you don't actually need conscious
Mm,
awareness and what I call agency. So a robot's usually just doing one fixed kind of repetitive task over and over again. So in that case,
right.
you can be completely unconscious, completely unaware of what you're doing. But when you have something like a humanoid, it's now a general purpose system. It's designed, or let's say it's envisioned, that a humanoid robot could go into any environment and do any task just like a person, even an environment they've never seen before. So this is just not possible at the moment with humanoid technologies. Every little task needs to be shown millions of examples of training data. And it's, although it's generalizing a tiny bit within that training data set, it's not working anything like the way a person works. It's not able to go into a completely unfamiliar environment. And what we're actually seeing at the moment is all the humanoid efforts, at least the ones I'm tracking, seem to be ending up going into niche applications to begin with, like automotive manufacturing or warehouse tasks. And again, it's this same old story that everyone starts out with a grand vision for creating something general purpose. And then when you take
Yeah.
a product to market, it ends up being very specialized. So I started trying to think out of the box. I'm like, why is this pattern happening over and over and over again with robotics companies? Maybe we need something different. So now I'm not technically working on the robotics hardware stuff anymore, but I'm looking at are there software systems we can add in to AI to handle those unfamiliar environments, to handle edge cases, and to make them need a lot less training data than they do now.
They need less training data. So like my understanding right now is autonomy. As I've interviewed multiple CEOs of many humanoid bot companies, right? They say that autonomy is it kind of trades places, right? At first, autonomy was going to be the thing that's going to be really hard, but it sounds like now they're finding that they're making progress training a bot just by through simulation, through a just looking at other humans actually doing it, and then the AI being to recognize its environment. And now they're working on the hardware, but I'm sure it's like you're saying, it's actually going to be the autonomy is going to be hard again. Can you explain the difference though? So, like Tesla's AI is supposed to be able to, using vision, be understanding the environment. It knows what a fire hydrant, it knows what a cup is, it knows what a pitcher is, and it knows that you're supposed to put the water in the pitcher. At what point does this is it AI conscious today? And if not, when does it become conscious?
Yeah, I don't, I'm in the camp that I don't think AI is conscious at all
Yeah,
today.
yeah,
It's a controversial opinion. It's certainly not been proven one way or the other. People tend to fall like about 50-50 on thinking, well, maybe there's some kind of
really.
consciousness there, maybe there isn't. I definitely think there isn't right now. But I think if you take the humanoids of today, I just have not seen any empirical evidence of a humanoid doing a general purpose task in like a
Right.
home or something like that. So, and I have to be careful what I say here, but all the videos you see online tend to be very demo focused. They don't look like they've actually been deployed and tested as a product and they're working generally.
Mm-hmm.
They to
Mm-hmm.
me they look very staged. So that's kind of what I'm wondering about now is why don't we see these products? People have been working on this for decades now. Why don't we see them already in environments like the home doing things? And I think it's because they're not conscious.
Okay. Well, you did say though that your research right now, right? It's still early,
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
early.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very very early. In fact, there's kind of this chain I think of disciplines you have to go through. So at the moment, consciousness is somewhere in between philosophy and science.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then you have to go philosophy, science, engineering, technology to kind of
Mm-hmm.
like make the leap between an idea and
Mm-hmm.
say a business or a product. So there's this kind of long chain you have to go through. So what I'm trying to do is take it from philosophy to science and then through to engineering. So
Okay.
can we go beyond just the like philosophizing? Can we go beyond thought experiments? And can we actually create an engineered technological artifact that could eventually go into a humanoid robot that would
Yeah.
allow it to truly understand what it's doing, truly be aware of its environment, and be able to make free decisions where it has its own built-in goals?
Okay. So from philosophy to research first, and then but I know you said, which makes so cool, right? You're starting the company because you want to lay the groundwork for the patents, at least as you build up the infrastructure for this to actually work, right? Maybe explain to us what your experiments are and how do you take that philosophy? What is consciousness? How do you apply it to something practical in the future?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me, why are you making this into a company? Isn't this like a research project?
Right?
The answer
Yeah.
is yes, it is a research project, but most research institutions are also open-ended, so they don't have a product idea in mind when they're
Mm-hmm.
conducting research. They're just trying to explore the science, whereas this project actually does have a clear product in mind. It's just that we need to prove the scientific result first, and then once that result is proven, then we can actually build that product. So there is definitely a product angle to this and a technology and product roadmap. It's just that the first phase of this thing is doing these scientific experiments and showing that there's a result there.
So yeah, tell us what your experiment is, because again, I'm going to butcher this, but I think you're saying that the human brain is quantum. There's quantum processes, right? In the microtubules, Penrose, from what I read about, right? And then, so you're saying that the human or robot needs to also, like, it's when the you can explain it, the collapse, and then it can actually make a decision, and it has, at that point, is it kind of like a free will? Is that what you're
Yeah, that's right.
experiment? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, a couple of things there. So on the Penrose stuff, so
Yeah.
Roger Penrose actually proposed this quantum consciousness idea sort of independently of the brain. He didn't actually know at that time what was going on in the brain, and then he joined
Oh, okay.
forces with Stuart Hameroff, who was
Okay.
an
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
anesthesiologist.
That's right. That's right.
Hard word
Yeah.
to say. So he studies how you actually remove consciousness in people to do surgeries on them and stuff like that. And
Right.
so when they got together, they kind of came up with this idea, well, maybe it's microtubules. But Penrose's original ideas sort of don't necessarily say that it has to be microtubules. So I'm kind of, I guess, looking at the question more in that abstract terms, like, are there quantum effects at all, regardless of what structure they're implemented on in the brain, and then can we use quantum computers to sort of model that? So the research we're doing doesn't really depend on whether the microtubules thing is correct or not. It's sort of looking at the problem at a bit of a higher level of abstraction. So yeah, in terms of what we're doing, so we take our robot systems and there's data coming. So now your audience will be in familiar territory. So we have robot systems and there's sensory data coming into the robot systems.
Right.
And we take the sensory data and then we essentially put that into a quantum state, it's called. So we use the classical data coming in through the vision, audio, touch, proprioception modalities and we turn that into a quantum state. So we transfer classical information into quantum information. Then what we do is we then do something called collapse that state. So this is a quantum mechanics term where you take a system that's in a quantum mechanical superposition, including entanglement and other weird quantum properties. And then when you collapse it, it chooses one definite classical state. So before it's chosen, it's in sort of all possibilities at once. And then once it collapses, it chooses one classical reality. And then that reality is what causes the action to happen in the robot. So the state that you end up in is just a set of zeros and ones, and that controls the motors of the robot. So what the quantum system has done is it's actually taken all possibilities of all actions the robot could take.
Right.
And from that quantum possibility landscape, it's selected one action to actually do. So you can think of it as the quantum algorithm is kind of searching a huge space of all possible action options that the robot could take, and then it's like selecting one and picking it. And the big experimental question is, how does it select that and why? So that's where this idea of, is there a kind of built-in agency or a built-in free will, if you like, in deep in quantum physics, which is how our mind works, and can we put that into robots?
Okay. You did say that it's not exactly the same. You're not actually trying to create consciousness like it is in a human. It's a conscious-like
yeah,
mechanics.
that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, we probably won't be creating, I mean, at least at first, these are tiny quantum states. So again, it depends who you ask, but people think that the number of quantum modes are, if you like, qubits that are going on in the brain. There could be millions or billions of them. So we certainly won't be able to get anything like the scale of human consciousness until we have much larger quantum computers. But the idea is maybe we can create a very small quantum state to start with and sort of have a spark of something. So I like to think it's more like a little single-celled organism or a little insect or something that's still very smart. It's still making decisions about the world. It's still learning. But it's nothing like the kind of rich conscious experience that a person would have at the moment.
Okay, I like that very much. I can understand that a little bit. So more like an insect, right? But who still there's a small part of consciousness, right? But it can independently act. It's not being told do this, and it can kind of take a look and somehow it figures out what it needs to do to achieve an objective. And you think that is going to be much more rewarding for a humanoid robot than just the straight do this, that's this way. Every time you see it, do it this way. You think that's more, I don't know, general purpose, right?
Yeah, I think that you can get what's called a general purpose reward function from quantum physics. So we'll still be able to tell a robot what to do. The problem is when you're trying to create a general purpose, like autonomous system, you need to define a very complex goal structure or goal hierarchy for it. So there's two ways you can do this. One is you can just try and program it. So you can sit down and like program in all the things a robot should and shouldn't do. If that, do this, do this. That's very hard with a general purpose robot because you're talking about it being able to do any task and potentially things it's never even seen or encountered before. So that becomes very hard. So the way AI researchers do this today is they try and learn that reward function from watching human demonstration. And this is where all that training data comes in. So you take a humanoid robot and you make it do millions or billions of different things by either teleoperation or by a person sort of piloting it or watching videos. So at that point, you're trying to get this information about this reward function from data. Now, the problem with that is we have absolutely no idea what scale of data is required. So we know already from the example of self-driving that we still don't have full self-driving. Even given the massive amounts of training data that have been collected already from both simulation and from real vehicles on the road, that's just a car. And I think a car is much simpler than something like a humanoid robot in a domestic environment. So there's this question of maybe there'll never be enough training data, even in principle. Maybe we need more training data than there are atoms in the universe or something to train the system. So in that case, you can't program it, you can't train it. How do we get something general purpose that behaves like us? Well, one way is you could ask, does the brain actually have some built-in kind of reward function that it's accessing? And that's where this theory comes in. That's what the quantum consciousness theory really is.
Yeah, I think I'm catching on a little bit. So basically that you can train a bot to do a certain task, but if you truly want it to be general purpose, a human or robot, it needs to be able to be be able to be having its own decisions making and so forth. I'm going to bring in Dr. John Gibbs here. He's got this background. He knows more than AI than anybody else. He's a professor of AI. Welcome, John. Go ahead and ask your questions.
Am I on? Oh, there I am. Now I'm on. Hey.
Hi, John.
Hello. So, oh my goodness, I was taking a lot of notes while you two were talking, and I think I will start at the end of what you were talking about. Of course, I love this idea of the question of whether there's enough training data in the universe to train an unconscious being. So if we dial this back, and let me take a sort of devil's advocate argument, the argument would be that deep neural networks are hypothetically, or at least in theory, universal function approximators. So they can approximate anything that has a function. So, okay, given the fact, like, even if we want to argue that consciousness is quantum in that case, would deep neural networks be able to approximate consciousness to an extent that it's okay, that it's not really conscious, but it's quasi-conscious enough that it would work? So I'll start with that devil's advocate argument or question.
Yes, I agree with you. I think if you give a system enough training data, it starts mimicking what a conscious being would do. But I don't think it's actually conscious at that point. What I think it's doing is, so let me give you an analogy, because it's
Okay.
like this stuff's
Yeah.
very abstract. So
Yeah.
imagine you've been driving for 20 years and you're driving to work. So people report not even remembering that they drove, right? So that's analogous to the situation we've given an AI like millions of examples of training data, and it's sort of following this like built-in habit or this unconscious pattern of behavior, if you like. But now if something really unusual happens, like, a house drives past or there's like a weird lightning ball in the sky or something, suddenly while you're driving, you snap back to being consciously aware of what's going on. You remember everything in detail. Some people say time slows down. They become hyper conscious. So I think there are these situations going on all the time in our lives. And so whilst we ourselves have been trained on many, 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 many training examples, and we can behave unconsciously in a lot of cases, you might well ask, if we don't need our consciousness, why are we still conscious most of the time for most of the things we're doing? So I argue, even though it looks like we've seen everything before, most of what we do during the day is actually very novel, and we don't have training data covering it. So I think these general purpose humanoids will come across the same problem, is that yes, if they've been driving in a very routine way for 20 years, they will be able to handle that. But the minute something unexpected happens, they have no fallback plan, whereas humans have a fallback. It's conscious awareness and intuitive decision making.
Okay. So I think you answered the question I was going to follow up with, which was, if it can approximate consciousness, why do you care about actual consciousness? But what you're saying is that there is a point at which this imitation of consciousness will fail. And when it fails is when you actually need the reality. I mean, consciousness is a very expensive, your brain has to use a lot of power, a lot of food you have to eat in order to make that happen. So clearly there must be some sort of evolutionary advantage, or else why would we have it? Okay. Let me ask this question, because since this is about humanoid robots and stuff, and this is something that's very near and dear to my own heart. Do you believe that embodiment is needed for consciousness?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think yes.
Okay.
Although it depends what you mean by embodiment, because I tend to think of all kinds of things as embodiment, including like an agentic system controlling a browser or something. Is a form of embodiment. So do I think it needs some kind of embodiment where there's data coming in through sensory modalities and then there's some kind of actuation happening, even if that's typing text into a box? Yes. I think if it's in a physical embodiment like a robot, I think it will develop consciousness that's more like the kind of consciousness we have. Yeah.
So I guess in my mind, there's this sense of like, you need to have some sort of sense of self versus other, which I understand in the sense of physical embodiment. There's me, and then there's everything else. And I don't see the same thing, let's see, in a data center, ChatGPT, that's sitting in a data center distributed across 50,000 GPUs. There's no real sense of like, this is me versus this is something else. So, which is where I've always kind of thought that at least embodiment would have an advantage in terms of consciousness. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's more like just the consciousness aligns with us. Like it's more like our kind of consciousness, whereas maybe ChatGPT has something more like akin to an ant or a beehive or something like that, where it's just this sort of generalized sense of self, or I don't know. I mean, what other metaphor could we use to think about that?
Yeah, I think here again, this gets kind of complicated because I think we have to separate consciousness itself from the model of the self that we build up over time. Okay. So here's how I think of it. And again, this is like maybe a controversial view. Not everyone thinks about consciousness in the same way. I think of consciousness as kind of like a force or a built-in resource that you're born with. And so imagine you're a newborn baby. Now you're going to have some pre-built brain structures that sort of know what's going on a little bit, but you're learning from what you're experiencing and from what you're doing. So I think at that point, consciousness is sort of driving that activity. It's choosing actions in a smart, intuitive way, and it's gathering training data for then what inside you is more like a deep neural net of the type we're familiar with. I think consciousness supplies training data to this large neural net, and then we develop a model of ourselves through that network. So this self model is actually built, I would say, using something very similar to classical AI. And sorry, when I say classical AI, I mean not quantum. So like modern transformer or deep net approaches or whatever you want. So I think that those are still being trained inside the brain. Our self-model is contained in them, our understanding of the world. But I think where that initially, the training data came from initially was from consciousness making sort of decisions behind the scenes. So in my view, consciousness is like more primary, it's more fundamental. And then intelligence and models of the world build up on top of that. Now, a lot of people think it's the other way around, which is why I wanted to try and remove the confusion here.
Right. So, well, okay. So, Howard, define consciousness. Like, I mean, I think we're talking around this thing, but the elephant in the room is nobody really has a great definition of consciousness.
Yeah. I get asked this a lot, so I've been trying to refine the answer to this question. But so there's two ways of looking at this question. One is like, how does it appear to us? And then the second part is, what actually is it? What's the mechanism behind it? So the way it appears to us is that we seem to have this experience, this subjective awareness. It feels like a movie playing out inside our minds. You can think of it as it feels like something to be me. Or you. It feels like something. That's and then we also have this sense of agency. We have a sense that we can make a choice. We can choose what to do. So that definition of consciousness, which is subjective experience and agency, is kind of like a bit like the what we see as a result. What it actually is, I think, under the hood is what's called a philosophical view of panpsychism. I don't know if you've heard of this, which is that all matter has built into it little bits of consciousness. So consciousness is not something that emerges from the brain. It's more like fundamentally built into the fabric of physics. And what we find with the brain is, an analogy is it's like little water vapor droplets everywhere. So you look at the water vapor and you don't really see it in the air, but when the water vapor coalesces in the right way, it forms clouds and oceans and lakes and structures that we can see. So from the panpsychist perspective, these little water vapor droplets have coalesced together and created things like brains that are structuring consciousness in a very careful way that allows us to have this inner experience. So that's a little bit like philosophically what the mechanism behind what I think consciousness is. Okay.
So it's a fundamentally emergent property of the universe in that case. It's just, if you collect enough matter together, especially in a structured sort of manner, it's going to produce something akin to a consciousness. At some level.
If you structure it in the right way, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Suzanne, I want to ask you a question about safety and ethical implications, right? So I know that you kind of position this a little bit as you think that this is going to be the way to get these AIs more aligned with human values. But on the other side of it, right, you're giving these human or robots free will. Mustafa Suleyman, who's the co-founder of DeepMind, he's now in charge of Microsoft AI. One of the things he's been warning about is AI self-training, self-improving AI on their own, learning on their own. That's like could go, wrong, can go really wrong. Letting the robot decide, learn, be alive, instead of just being told what to do and doing what you're told to do, you're letting it make its own free will. Tell me what you're thinking about. Is it safer in the future, or is it going to be, potentially worse in the future?
Mm-hmm. So I like to, so this is a very complicated subject to start with, but I like to think about this in terms of where do the goals come from? So even in a system that's self-improving, it still has a goal structure that has to come from somewhere. Because what does improving mean, right? It's relative to something. So somewhere that goal has been given to the robot. So when people talk about self-improving AI, it's not actually modifying its goal structure. It can't. A system cannot modify its own goal structure because it has no meta goal that it would be trying to optimize by changing its goals. So you can't get out of this sort of circular logic of it coming up with its own goals. The goals have to come from somewhere. So they either come from being programmed in, being what I call side-loaded. So that's through imitation learning. They're being copied or mimicked from what people are doing, watching people. Or they come from what I'm proposing, which is like a built-in fundamental part of physics that we don't fully understand yet, but I think is what life taps into. So I think all life taps into deep goal structures that are actually built into physics. You can think of this as physics having like purposeful behavior. It's actually trying, the universe is trying to do something. It's not just doing random stuff, it's actually trying to do something. So what I'm proposing is if we connect AI to that deep level of physics where the nature around us wants to achieve something, then that's a third way of getting a goal system in AI that doesn't involve it either mimicking people, which can go wrong when it finds an edge case, or being programmed in, which can go wrong because then you have to ask who's supplying the goals and who is giving it the orders in the first place. So that's kind of maybe a long-winded answer. But I think the reason that's safer is because I'm not sure I trust whoever is programming in those goals into any AI system we see.
Cool. Okay, can I flip the question on its head? This is something that I've thought about an awful lot, and I'm thinking about it even with large language models and stuff right now. So let's assume consciousness is almost like if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, right? In other words, I have to assume you're conscious because you behave that way. I can only experience my own. So at some point, especially with the humanoid robot, we're going to get a robot that says, I am conscious, I am a being. What sort of rights do we have to grant this thing? If there's no way to disprove it's conscious, like I think about that. I'm like, well, gosh, these large language models, they're like, oh, time for the next generation. Click, you're deleted. And they're like, but wait, and even worse with a humanoid robot, it's a physical entity and you're like into the scrapyard with you. Like what do we have you thought about what comes downstream if we actually do get to consciousness?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the reasons I'm like kind of excited about the quantum consciousness models, because if it does turn out to be a quantum phenomenon or some other kind of deep physics that we haven't quite figured out yet, then it's actually a better situation to be in, because now there's a clear line between
testable.
whether it's whether it's conscious or not. It's like, we'll say you need a quantum computer to have any kind of chance of it being conscious, then at least we know, okay, all the AIs that are not quantum are now obviously definitely in the non-conscious bucket. So how do you know it? How do you know a system conscious is like the same question as how do you know a system can feel pain or suffer? So that's where this really starts to matter, because you then will need to know whether these systems are actually like enjoying themselves or whether they are like having a terrible time. That's really important. And I think another reason it's important to know if systems are conscious or not is because a lot of these systems are mimicking empathetic interactions with people. They're pretending to have feelings and have empathy and care about us, but it's not clear they really do. Right. So to me, that's not a great situation to be in. We're sort of like, it's like a deep fake of emotions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
I can see half the audience, maybe even more than half the audience, is freaking out right now. Like, can you imagine in the future, right? There's going to be these humanoid robots that are not just computers, which is easier for us to understand, right? They're just there's just an oven.
Right.
They're just
very
a
fancy
tool.
oven.
Fancy oven. Tell them what to do, it does it. Now you're talking about free will, be able to have its own self, maybe have its own feelings, even if they are aligned, like you're saying, that they have the same goals as humans do, but it's still a separate individual personality. That's, I don't know. That's sometimes, can you imagine a future where that is the case?
Yeah. I mean, I understand that people feel that this is scary, and I do too. I'm not like totally Pollyanna about this. I'm just an optimist, but look, can I give maybe one argument to your audience as to why they maybe could think about this being a good thing? So I think in the near-term future, I'm actually very interested in social applications of robots. And I think it's important we have robotic systems, especially in the home, but also in schools and hospitals and care facilities, that truly care about the people they're interacting with and not just faking it or mimicking it. I just think there's something like deeply unnatural or uncanny valley about this system's pretending that it's being so emotional and caring about you while it's not feeling a single thing. So I think that to me is just sort of distasteful, but I think the far future application is more interesting. So if we have machines, think of two sets of machines in the future. One set is general purpose humanoids, and they're completely unconscious. They're just running deep nets. They're analytical, mathematical, predictable. And then there's another set that are conscious and they have human values, feelings, awareness, experience. I would rather have the second set go off and explore the cosmos and, continue on our legacy in the stars rather than these essentially like machine probes that are not. So it's a little bit of a kind of utopian future argument here, but I would love to see our civilization carry on and go beyond this planet as a conscious machine civilization, not as just these kind of like unconscious drones.
What about the integration between a human and a machine? So Neuralink is integrating into human brains the ability to control computers and eventually control robots. And then if the brain is quantum, can't you use that quantum to control another computer that you've created to then control the robot? And test it that way to see if you can actually see if the quantum can actually make a robot make decisions.
Yeah, I think once we get technologies like Neuralink, it opens up a completely new category of research. Because as soon as we have Neuralink style interfaces, we can start to ask the question, if I plug my brain into another person's brain, do I feel their consciousness, right? So at this point, you're going to start getting to these really interesting questions of, can we measure consciousness directly now? Because at the moment, we can't measure it directly. We can only measure the behavior of a system. We can't actually go inside it. But if we had a Neuralink, maybe we literally could go inside its mind. And so maybe you plug the Neuralink into an unconscious robot and you don't feel anything extra. And then you plug it into a conscious robot and you have a completely different experience. So maybe this is a way to test for consciousness in the future. And then at that point, maybe you could control a robot body at the same time as your own body or something like that.
Very cool. Can I ask a practical question? and this may be well beyond where you are right now in terms of the company, but one of the problems with quantum computing, I think you maybe before we even started recording, the whole idea of like qubits and stringing together. No, actually, anyway, but we've put together maybe 1,000 is like the maximum number of qubits. We're talking about orders of magnitude lower than the quantity probably needed to be able to replicate human consciousness, but beyond that is, in order to do just that, you've got these massive room-sized machines that, the little actual computer is like this big, but obviously you can't stick that in a bot. So what is the engineering challenge of dealing with a quantum, if consciousness requires quantum computation, how do you get that into a bot? Does it have to be cloud-based where the bot is actually, its consciousness resides somewhere else than its body, or what?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question because I think the future development roadmap of quantum computers really depends on what applications they're being used for. Right. So say we do discover that there is some quantum component to consciousness. That would be a super amazing breakthrough. And I think what people would realize then is, oh my goodness, we need to invest more in quantum computing now because there's this huge new category that didn't even exist before. So I like to liken it to the GPU revolution. So, everyone was using GPUs to play some games, do some rendering on the monitor, and then suddenly we realized we could use it for deep learning. And then boom, GPUs became a completely different animal, and the amount of investment that went into them got really high. So I think, if we discover new applications or new categories of applications for quantum computers, I think this like trajectory we're on now, where we're seeing them slowly and steadily improving, would just sort of hockey stick, skyrocket at that point. Okay, so cool. I could imagine even on the current roadmaps, by 2030, it looks like there'll be systems with around 1 million qubits, which is, I think, quite a lot to be experimenting with some things. And also, not all quantum computers are huge room size things now. People are actually creating a little smaller versions based on
closer to room temperature,
photonics and things. Yeah. So there's even an option, like, this is kind of a bit of speculative, not that any of this isn't speculative, but a bit of a speculative thing, that if our brain is actually using quantum computers, there's options to make biological quantum computers.
Oh, I've thought about that too, and I didn't know if you wanted to get into it. So, okay.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I even thought about it for a while for Nirvanic as part of our technology roadmap. The problem is dealing with those biological systems. We still don't quite have the technology to pick up a microtubule, put it on a circuit or something. Right. So I think we will get there and be able to create bio quantum computers if there's a big need for it.
Okay. And clearly this operates on about 20 watts, so that's great.
Yeah,
it's
it's
fantastic.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And there's
Well,
even some super interesting evidence that when, so they put experienced meditators like Zen monks in
Mhm.
MRI and fMRI scanners and look at
Mhm.
their brain activity when they're in these wildly rich, like conscious experiences. And you think that the brain would kind of use more energy, but it actually goes quiet. It uses less energy. So I find that fascinating, and I'm like, well, maybe the quantum computing element is kind of coming online, and the neural net, the classical neural net, shutting down somewhat, and the quantum one's firing up. So maybe it even uses less energy than we think.
what is your time frame, and what is your next step? If you can give us like a step by step of what you're going to do with Nirvanic. What are you doing this month? What are you doing next year? And how do you see your progress?
Yeah, so the next 6 to 12 months is really like reserved for these scientific experiments because I wanted there to be like a really big window before we kind of go out there and raise money to develop a product and technology and stuff like that, to just have some time to sit down and carefully do the science. Like you really have to be extremely rigorous with these experiments. So we're connecting robots to quantum computers and looking for signs of deviations from random action selection, signs of agency happening. But those could come from any kind of noise or bias in the system. So you have to be really, really careful. So basically, the next 6 to 12 months are going to be doing a series of these scientific experiments where we do what I call exploring the parameter space. So there are many, many parameters or variables, if you like number of qubits, how fast you're running the system, what kind of robot you're using, what environment the robot's in, what sensors it has. All these are like different variables you can change. So we're looking for these signatures of a quantum system controlling the robot in a way that's novel or unforeseen. But there's a huge number of variables we have to test to try and. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next year.
And then is it too early to figure out what your future is for the company? Are you going to license this? Are you going to be the building brains and letting vendors put it in the brains in? Or yeah, what does this look like? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so the current idea now is to create what I call like a consciousness module. So when you've got a system that is sent out there into the world, it's using either its onboard trained networks or it's connecting to a cloud service to provide it with action decisions, and it's doing that fully unconsciously. But systems kind of tend to know that they tend to be able to measure their prediction error. So the idea is if it gets into a regime where it doesn't really know what it's doing, it's not seen this before, it's not on the training data manifold, it can then reroute the data off to the consciousness module in the cloud and get back what I call a conscious decision. And so it's a bit like you're driving using your trained driving model, and then something weird happens, and you start streaming your data off to the consciousness module.
In a weird sense, it's it would be the same thing. Thinking about full self-driving or autonomous driving, it would be like if there was a human monitoring a car that could then take over, except instead of the human, it's actually like an AI agent. That's like,
that's a perfect example of because what I did at both Kindred and Sanctuary is you had this sort of hybrid model of teleop blending seamlessly with autonomy. So when the autonomous module isn't able to handle it, it switches back to a teleop backup. So a person's literally on call. And so in a way, it's kind of funny because that's kind of like a consciousness module that you're bringing online.
And it does allow it to be in the cloud, which allows you to get around that technological hurdle that's exists right now.
Yeah, if we can do full low-level sensory teleoperation over an internet connection, I don't see why a consciousness module couldn't send that data fast enough.
That's very, very cool.
So it sounds very logical to me, and I'm sure it sounds like from John as well. But tell me, like, what's your reception from the scientific community, from the humanoid robot community? Are they thinking you are so far out there, this is crazy, it's impossible? Are they going, I can't believe somebody's actually, like, which is what my first statement, right? It was, I can't believe somebody's actually doing this. It makes sense. At least somebody should research it. There's something here. Of course, barring the, not barring, but, the safety thing is the thing that I'm really struggling with right now. Like, is it safer to have a bot to have free will, or is it safer that they don't have free will?
Yeah. Well, I think the safest thing of all at the moment is to know what consciousness is. So we know then whether it can and does or doesn't have it. So in a way, I think, we need to understand it more. And Nirvanic's mission is really to understand consciousness. And, we just happen to be thinking about a product.
If it turns out that it's safer to not have other conscious beings that are superior to humans somehow, like physically, whatever, then at least know that it is.
Yeah, that's right. And there's lots of other like opportunities for products that aren't AI based, if that happens to be the case. Like we're talking about consciousness technologies that could be applied to people too. So AI is just sort of the easiest use case to imagine here at the start.
So what's the reaction you're getting from the scientific community or humanoid bot companies? Yeah.
Obviously, like most people I meet do not agree with me.
Okay.
So I'm very used to that.
What part?
Well, it's a
what
very controversial theory. Well, there's several controversial things about it. So firstly, it requires a different philosophical standpoint than most people have. So even forget about quantum and AI and anything, even thinking that consciousness is like a fundamental part of the universe rather than an emergent property of the brain, that in itself is controversial. So, but there are quite a lot of people now that are more on the panpsychism or the idealism side of things. So that's kind of changing slowly. And then the second super controversial thing about it is that it's quantum. And that is still very, very controversial. And admittedly, the evidence, there's not a lot of evidence for it, but I think there's enough evidence for us to take it seriously as a hypothesis and to come up with some scientific tests for it now. And I just think we need to do the science first. So by engineering experiments and putting together technologies, I think we can do the science there. I think of these robots connected to quantum computers as being kind of like the LHC for consciousness. Like we're running millions and millions and millions of experiments, and we're looking for like a little signature or something that's like sort of analogous to the Higgs boson or something like that. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. But yeah, it's very controversial. I'm used to people telling me I'm like full of crap. This is just comes with the territory now. And I just think it's worth exploring because, what if it is right? I think it could be revolutionary in terms of our understanding of consciousness and science itself. So,
I mean, honestly, even if you can figure out what consciousness is, regardless of the applications, that's a Nobel Prize right there. I mean, that's
if the consciousness is quantum,
right? I mean, if you can prove that, if you could prove that, that's like.
And we still don't know what consciousness is, like no matter what anyone says. Yeah. So it might be quantum, it might not be, but we certainly don't know exactly what it is yet. So it's worth doing more science experiments to at least rule out quantum. Like, okay, maybe what we're trying to do here is rule out that it's quantum. And most people will be like, what's the point? We already know it's not quantum. But
I think that's a good analogy for the LHC again, because they've rolled out an awful lot of supersymmetry theories and things based on what they've gotten. So can I ask a question? This is something that gave me a lot of motivation. I was actually in an airport a couple of months ago and was in just a stupid one of those newsstand stores. And I picked up like a little mechanical doll that could move around. It was nothing. And I was like, oh, it's so cute. And I started thinking about the motivation, like the mental leap was anything that looks and acts like a humanoid robot, a human robot, or a dog robot, or a cat, anything
with eyes.
Anything with eyes, anything that we're used to interacting with in that way, like especially a humanoid form, there's going to be such a drive to anthropomorphize this. And so I think that it makes sense that you want to have something that can consciously interact rather than falsifying that. I think what you were saying was like a deep fake. It's like, yeah, okay, so you can interact with this thing and it pretends, but it's not real. But if it actually is conscious, then it is your friend. It's not just a fake friend. It's like a real friend because it has free will about choosing to interact with you in that way. So it's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people have been trying to build models of consciousness and emotion into robots for so long, and I'm sorry to the people that really think they've done it well, but I've just never had a good experience like interacting with a robot that's felt
They're
real.
creepy. They're super creepy.
Yeah. And I feel bad saying that because I know how much effort has gone into this and how many people have tried so many clever things. But just me personally, I've never been able to look a robot in the eyes and see like a spark of life there in the way it interacts with me. And I think that that's sad. I think that we should have that. We're being surrounded by technology. It's increasingly encroaching on our lives. Then, if there's two things you can do. We can either get rid of all our technology and rehumanize that way, or we could humanize our technology more. And I'm sort of in the latter camp because I don't think we can just get rid of all our technology.
That's cool. That's very cool.
That Mustafa Suleiman, one of his TED Talks, he said that everything, all the AIs, you'll be interacting with any device, and every device will have its own AI, and every AI will have its own personality. And I just like struggled to understand how that is and why that is, why each AI will have a different personality. But then the way you describe consciousness module, but it's still up to the cloud. So it doesn't sound like it's an individual, like, back to that original question John was saying at the very beginning, like if you're physically different than the others, sense of self, maybe that then it's going to, but if it's going to tap into the same module, they're all going to be the same person.
That's a really good question. I think, again, we would have to decide whether, well, okay. Maybe let me take a step back here. I think the consciousness module is going to be shared between all of them. But then I think the data that consciousness module throws off will become the training data set. So at that point, you then have to decide, am I going to coalesce all the data sets into one, or am I going to keep them separate? So it's really very similar to the concept of like teleoperation. So if you have one person teleoperating a robot supplying all the training data, the mimicry result is going to look like one person. But if you have 20 or 30 people all taking turns to teleop it, then the result the deep net will learn will look more like an amalgam of all those people's personalities. So I think consciousness is kind of the same as that. It's consciousness itself doesn't have a personality. It's like what it learns through being in a specific embodiment for a specific amount of time that develops into a personality. Yeah.
Cool. Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what is your plans for raising money? You've launched a company. What's your next step there?
Yeah, so I'm looking into it and to see if there is anyone sort of interested in this at a very basic level. But again, I'm very aware this is very early. So anyone who is interested in investing this will be investing in it at knowing full well that it is a risky science project at the start, and that the product may be quite a while away. So it's something I'm exploring, but I can't really talk about the exact plans for the raising right now.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. But you are, like I said, unique. I mean, you co-founded a quantum computing company, right? D-Wave in Vancouver.
No, I didn't co-found D-Wave. Okay. I just worked. Yeah. That's right.
Worked there.
Yeah, I just worked there.
Okay, fine. Then you co-founded Kindred.
Yeah, Kindred,
right? Which is general AGI to control robots, training robots, and then you co-founded Phoenix or Sanctuary.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the earliest humanoid robots, and then now you're doing this. So, based on your experience, it makes sense that you're combining everything you've learned to see, right? Yeah,
it sounds like I kind of jump all over the place, but really what I'm trying to do is create or understand the human mind. So that from that, for learning and AI learning, and then humanoid robots and neuroconsciousness and how consciousness creates agency. It's all about trying to understand like what we are deep down, and whether or not our machines, our AIs can ever be like that, or if they're fundamentally different.
That's a cool project. Yeah. It's kind of beautiful, actually, when you think about it. It's really the whole quest, even though it sounds like an engineering project, is really more of a philosophical one of understanding ourselves better through projecting it into machines. Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah.
And it could even go further than that. Like I think learning what consciousness is and understanding it more will help us improve it in people too. So we're talking about AI and humanoid robots, but this idea of maybe in the future it could be applied to us as well, to both kind of enhance our consciousness. Maybe we could keep up with the AIs, or in the case where there are conditions of consciousness, like certain like mental health disorders and things like that, maybe it could help alleviate some of the symptoms that people don't want to have necessarily there.
Wow.
Yeah, so you refer to your company as Consciousness Technologies, and I've just been applying it to human robots because that's the audience for this. But how broad is this idea? Why did you call it Consciousness Technologies?
Yeah, so again, it's because I think in the future we're going to start actually interfacing with the human brain itself. So at that point, if we've created, say, consciousness modules that can connect into AI, and we've understood a little bit more about what consciousness is, then by the time this brain-computer interface field sort of matures another 10, 20 years, maybe at that point, these consciousness modules could actually plug into people as well. Or maybe at that point, we're starting to almost merge with our technology. So people talk about us merging with technology. I think just
is this what Elon Musk has been saying? Maybe you need to be working with Neuralink, because he's saying, right, in order to beat AI is going to be a force in the future. It can go really badly. One way he thinks that it can curtail it is to have humanity and humans integrating with that. If you can't beat them, join them. Maybe you can either become super powerful as well, or at least control the AI somehow. Maybe this is, you need to be talking to Elon Musk and Neuralink.
There you go.
Well, it is kind of like the sort of missing piece in the triangle, right? Because you've got like AI and humanoid robots, then you've got brain-computer interfaces, and it's like consciousness is the glue. You're going to hit consciousness at some point when you start messing around in those areas. So I think there's room for consciousness technologies to fit in. And I know Musk's talked about wanting to spread consciousness to other planets as we explore. So maybe
interesting. I always assumed he meant humans, and I know that he's going to use Optimus robots, but I didn't realize that he's actually thinking that Optimus robots might be conscious themselves. Or humans could control those bots, and then humans' consciousness is controlling them, right?
And just to be, we're kind of like talking very optimistically about all this, but I do think we have to be careful and cautious as well, because we really are. If we're creating conscious beings, it's like creating other humans or animals. We're creating things that have the ability to experience, including experience pain and suffering. So I really think we need to be very carefully about this. And actually, one of the reasons I want to make this consciousness module is that it's not built in. You can kind of switch it on or off, or like to say turn it up or down. So if your robot needs to be a bit more conscious in a situation, like say it's caring for someone who's sick at home, you turn up the consciousness. But then if it's just doing a routine job, in a mine or something that's very repetitive, and it would be painful if it was experiencing that, you turn the consciousness all the way down at that point.
This is bizarrely, I don't know if you've watched the show Severance, but it feels a little bit like
I've heard of this show now.
You need to watch the show. You need to watch the show.
People have mentioned it,
there's a severing of consciousness, so not quite the same as what you're saying. So these, ultimately these things would make the best version of the von Neumann probes, because which is the self-replicating probes that could take over the the galaxy, because they could turn the consciousness off, travel for dozens of years, turn it back on again, not have experienced the pain of that time, and then begin to build out whatever the next step is. So it's very cool.
It's a really interesting idea.
Suzanne, so without Nirvanic, are you optimistic about the future of where AI is headed and what can happen in the future? Where do you land there?
I'm kind of stuck between thinking it's not going to work properly because of this deepfake problem or this edge case problem where, we'll get these general purpose humanoids and they'll be doing maybe 50% of stuff, but then they just don't, it's just not generalizing enough. It's not able to be conscious. So we'll just see failure after failure, and then the whole thing will just kind of, people will lose interest in it. So I'm thinking maybe that will happen. So I almost see consciousness as being kind of like a saving, it comes along just at the right moment to address that pain point in the market. And then it finally allows humanoids to reach their full potential. And so I think maybe that might happen. So without it, maybe humanoids might not succeed. And then I'm also a bit in the camp of maybe they will succeed, but they'll just be these, what I call philosophical zombies forever in this slightly uncanny valley of, I'm pretty sure it's not really feeling anything, but let's just go along with it because it's doing the dishes kind of territory. And so I think, if Nirvanic didn't exist, I think we'll end up in one of those two worlds.
Wow, that's a pretty big mission in that case. You're here to save not just the human race, but the robot race too. Trying to save us all.
Right.
Man, I don't know.
I think
this
it's
is getting
given
scary.
The option. It's let's think about it as we have the option now to both understand what consciousness is, put it in a nice bucket, and then apply it to AI if and when we feel it's safe to do so, it's responsible to do so. But let's understand it first so we know what we're doing.
But but if I'm totally misunderstanding what I heard today, but are we saying that you're creating life?
Oh, wow.
So I don't think of what I'm doing as creating life or creating consciousness. I see it as tapping into what already exists. So I think that our like biological life, I think, taps into this deep underlying structure of physics that allows it to make agentic decisions on its own without you needing to program in a reward function. So I think we can connect technology to that same layer. So I don't know whether you describe that as creating life. I think of it more like harnessing a resource that the universe has provided to us, and life sort of comes from that.
Very cool. Wow.
Wow. Okay. Any last questions here, John?
No, I'm pretty blown away. I've got plenty of other questions, but I'll hold on to them. Yeah.
I'll think about this some more. This is great. So, Suzanne, this is mind blowing. Open up my consciousness.
Love to come back once we've got a little bit more done on the experimental side. I can show some demos and stuff.
I applaud you for doing something like this. And my initial reaction, as I told you, is like, I think that it's important that somebody is doing this. I'm still not decided whether or not it's going to be a positive future. And, you gave good answers, but it's very scary what could happen either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But follow Nirvanic if you want to check them out. Follow Suzanne's journey here. Her website is nirvanic.ai. The company on X is at Nirvanic AI. And then they have a newsletter. You can subscribe to that on their website so you can really follow along with them. Any last comments from you, Suzanne?
Oh, no, just, I think that what you focus on grows, and what you want to have happen, you can actually manifest that. So I'm trying to always focus on a world with an optimistic outcome for technology and general purpose robots. So yay, team optimism.
Right. And also, having a person like you, I feel comfortable to be one person that's going to derive, what AI safety, ethics and all that. So somebody's going to be doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you, John. Appreciate you guys. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John.
Bye.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.